We begin from the home front today, where residents of Santa Barbara in Buea are facing months of unreliable electricity after their transformer reportedly broke down, with thousands of households now calling for urgent intervention. But beyond Cameroon, a disaster of far greater scale is unfolding along the Nepal-Tibet border. A massive wall of mud, rock and water has swept through communities, killing at least 157 people and leaving hundreds missing, including foreign tourists and pilgrims. Homes, roads, bridges, and power infrastructure have been destroyed, while rescue teams are raised against time to reach those still trapped or unaccounted for. And as the search continues, authorities are still confronting the full scale of a disaster that struck with devastating speed. What triggered the deadly flood in Nepal, and how many more lives could be buried beneath the destruction? Well, we'll bring you the latest from the Nepal-Tibet disaster in our full report and many more. I am Tabitha Akor. Let's begin. Residents of Santa Barbara neighborhood in Buea have spent months struggling with unreliable electricity after their transformer reportedly broke down in June 2026, now leaving thousands or more households to cope with prolonged outages and uneven power supply. Now we'll see that the electricity crisis has become a daily frustration for residents who say a replacement transformer installed by Socadel is unable to adequately serve the entire neighborhood. As a result, electricity is being rationed between two sections of the community. But residents allege that the distribution has not been equal. According to them, one section can sometimes receive electricity for 3 to 4 days, while the other may get less than 24 hours before being plunged back into darkness. For families, the consequences go beyond the inconveniences of switching on a light. Residents say food stored in refrigerators has been spoiled during prolonged outages, adding financial pressure to already struggling households. Now, for children, the unreliable supply is raising concerns as another school year approaches, with limited access to electricity affecting studying and other basic activities at home. What began as a transformer failure in June of this year has therefore stretched into months of uncertainty, with the residents still waiting for a lasting solution. They are also calling on authorities and Socadel to intervene urgently, either by providing adequate power infrastructure or ensuring that the available electricity is distributed fairly between the two sections. Now, for the residents of Santa Barbara in Buea, the issue is no longer simply about having electricity. It is now about how long they can continue living without a reliable supply of one of the basic services and needs in their community. Now, away from that, let's head over to what is happening right here. When it comes to femicide, a really rising, disheartening and disturbing situation right there. The rising number of women killed in Cameroon is drawing growing public concern as repeated cases of femicide expose fears over the safety of women and raise questions about the authorities' response. The issue came under renewed scrutiny on Wednesday, August 26, when French Cameroon stopped defense and security officials met in Yaoundé to discuss the growing cases of femicide and infanticide. The meeting held at the Ministry of Defense was chaired by Defense Minister Joseph Betty Asomo and convened on the instructions of President Paul Biya. Betty Asomo described the killings of women and children, particularly in major cities across southern Cameroon, too, as an increasingly tragic phenomenon. He noted the frequency of reported attacks, warning that hardly a day passes without cases involving women and children. The meeting brought together senior officials responsible for Cameroon's security, including Territorial Administration Minister Paul Atangaji and others. Femicide was discussed alongside other security threats, including terrorism, kidnappings, urban and rural violence, and social unrest. But this is the most interesting part. While the meeting acknowledged the seriousness of the problem affecting families alike, 33 southern Cameroonian Ambazonians, authorities have not publicly outlined specific immediate measures to prevent further killings or strengthen protection for women at risk. Instead, the recommendations from the meeting are expected to be forwarded to President Biya for further instructions. And that draws the question. The development has intensified more questions about how French Cameroon is responding to violence against women, particularly as public concern grows over repeated cases of women being killed. For many, we see that the issue is no longer simply about acknowledging femicide as a security concern. It is about whether concrete measures will follow the growing alarm. And as another case threatens to become another statistic, the question remains, how many more women must die before the response becomes urgent enough to stop the killings? Do they have to wait for Paul Biya before giving the instruction? Well, let's move over to a very disastrous situation in Nepal. A catastrophic flash flood triggered by a massive collapse of rock and ice along the Nepal-China border has killed at least 157 people, with hundreds of tourists and residents still missing as rescue teams search through submerged villages and debris. The disaster struck on Wednesday after a huge mass of mud, rock, and ice collapsed into the Hende River near the Nepal-Tibet border, sending a torrent of water and debris downstream into Nepal. Entire settlements were inundated within minutes. Homes, vehicles, roads, bridges, and hydropower infrastructure were swept away, while large sections of the affected area were left without electricity and communications. Well, let's take a look for ourselves. Never seen before disaster. Now we'll see that Nepal police said 157 bodies had been recovered by Wednesday evening, but officials warned that the death toll could rise significantly as rescue workers reach areas that remain inaccessible. Nepalese tourism officials said more than 400 tourists were missing, including about 340 foreigners. Among those reported missing were pilgrims traveling to Kailash, Manasarovar in Tibet, a major Hindu pilgrimage destination. The missing included nationals from India, the United States, Australia, Britain, and Canada. South Korea also said 8 of its nationals working at a hydropower plant were also missing. Now, on the Chinese side of the border, authorities reported 3 deaths and 265 people missing in Yirong, although officials said the figures were still being verified. Now we see that the latest disaster has severely damaged the Yirong border port, cutting roads, electricity, and communications in the area. Rescue teams have struggled to reach some affected communities because bridges and roads have been destroyed and flood waters continue to run above normal levels. Now, security camera footage from the Chinese side captured people running from the approaching torrent before mud, rocks, and water engulfed buildings and vehicles, as seen before this part of the report. Now, we see the initial report suggested that an earthquake may have triggered the collapse of part of a glacier. The United States Geological Survey later said the tremor recorded around the time of the disaster was caused by the collapse of glacial rock and ice into the valley. Meanwhile, Nepal's Disaster Management Authority, citing an initial satellite assessment, said an ice and rock landslide triggered a debris-filled flood in the Hende River, about 20 kilometers northeast of the Rasuwagadhi border crossing. Now we see the helicopters have been deployed to evacuate survivors and deliver assistance, but rescue operations remain difficult in mountainous areas such as Yapuru, Bezi, and Timori, where helicopters have struggled to land. Now we see that the latest devastation has also prompted concern beyond Nepal and Tibet. Flood alerts were issued in northern India as water moved downstream toward Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Bihar authorities said about 5,000 people had already been evacuated from 6 districts, with plans to move up to 12,000 people from vulnerable areas. Now, as night fell, families gathered outside the Nepalese Army Training Center, being used as a base for rescue operations, searching for information about relatives who remain missing. Now, with hundreds still unaccounted for and entire communities buried beneath mud and debris, rescuers face a race against time to find survivors and determine the full scale of one of the region's deadliest disasters in recent years. Over to Liberia. A recent development is unfolding. Liberia's former Vice President, Joel Howard Taylor, has been remanded in prison pending trial after a court rejected her lawyer's request for her to remain in hospital on humanitarian grounds. Howard Taylor's legal team had asked the court to allow her to stay at a hospital in Monrovia, citing health concerns. Local reports said she suffered an asthma attack and experienced high blood pressure while in police custody. The former vice president, who served between 2018 and 2024, was arrested on August 19 at Roberts International Airport as she was about to leave the country. Now she is facing charges including drug trafficking, money laundering, and other offenses linked to an investigation into an alleged transnational cocaine trafficking network. Howard Taylor, who is also the wife of former Liberian President Charles Taylor, has denied the allegations through her lawyers, who maintain that the case is politically motivated. Now, prosecutors, however, say investigators have gathered travel records, audio recordings, witness account, and other evidence they believe connects the former vice president to individuals allegedly involved in the trafficking network. 3 other foreign nationals have also been charged in absentia over their alleged involvement in the case. Now we see that investigation follows a major anti-narcotics operation in Liberia last month, during which authorities, seized and destroyed about 4.2 metric tons of cocaine estimated to be worth $317 million. The operation also implicated senior police officials. The case has heightened concerns over West Africa's growing role as a transit route for cocaine shipment from South America to Europe. Now, drug networks have increasingly exploited porous borders, limited enforcement capacity, and vulnerabilities within state institutions across the region. For now, Howard Taylor remains legally presumed innocent. The allegations against her will be tested before the court as the prosecution presents its evidence. But with a former vice president now behind bars in a major narcotics investigation, the case raises a much bigger concern: how deeply has organized drug trafficking penetrated West Africa's political and security institutions? A critical question to leave you with. Now, still on today, we are bringing this to your very presence that we'll be having the Mezam County draft this weekend, August 28th, with the President of the Federal Republic of Ambazonia, His Excellency Dr. Samuel Ikome Sako. So please do well to stay tuned, and we appeal to all Ambazonians from the home front and the diaspora to ensure to join in. Well, until next time, this is where we'll draw the curtain on today's Flash News. Do have a pleasant day and stay safe.